Imagine this. You're a hungry child, living on the cold streets of Romania. A pastor offers you a warm meal, a bed, and the promise of a family. But instead of safety, you walk straight into a nightmare. Now, decades later, three survivors have stepped forward, filing explosive lawsuits against Harvest Christian Fellowship, one of America's most famous megachurches, and its founder, Greg Laurie. They claim church leaders not only failed to protect them, but also covered up years of CSA and trafficking at the hands of former Harvest pastor Paul Havsgaard. And here's the shocking part. This may be just the beginning. Over 20 more survivors are preparing to come forward. What really happened in those Harvest homes in Romania? And how could one of the most recognizable churches in America be tied to such disturbing allegations? Stay with me, because this story only gets darker the deeper we go. This week, in the Central District Court of California, three men, Marian Barbu, 33, Mihai Constantin Petcu, 40, and Christian Eroaie, 36, filed federal lawsuits. Their claims? That Paul Havsgaard, a man once trusted as a pastor and missionary under Harvest Christian Fellowship, used food and false promises to lure them into church-run homes in Romania, where they say they endured years of SA, exploitation, and even trafficking to third parties. But it doesn't stop with Havsgaard. These lawsuits also name Harvest's founder, Greg Laurie, and missions pastor Richard Schutte, accusing them of negligence, willful blindness, and a cover-up that spanned 20 years. And here's where the questions start piling up. Did Harvest leadership know? Could they have stopped it? Or worse, did they look the other way? These aren't faceless allegations. These are real men, with names, scars, and stories that sound more like horror films than ministry. Marian Barbu was only 8 when police, desperate to get him off the streets, handed him over to Havsgaard. He alleges he was SA'd by Havsgaard on many occasions, from 2000 to 2008, from the ages of 8 to 16. The lawsuit alleges Barbu tried to end his life multiple times because of the ABUSE, until he was eventually kicked out of the home. Marian lived in constant fear of SA by Havsgaard, and believed that at any moment Havsgaard would escalate the ABUSE to rape. What he thought would be a Christian refuge became what he later described as a torture chamber inside a prison. By 16, after repeated ABUSE, he was thrown back onto the streets, scarred, functionally illiterate, and suicidal. He explains that his mother died when he was 5. His father, who was an alcoholic, died when he was 15, but had been unable to care for him properly before that. Barbu is described in the lawsuit as functionally illiterate because he was not educated during the time he spent at the Harvest homes, Mihai Constantin. Petcu says the ABUSE began from 2000 through 2008 when he was just 14 and continued into adulthood. He claims Havsgaard not only abused him, but trafficked him to others. Christian Eroaie alleges that Havsgaard SA'd him on many occasions at the Harvest homes from 2000, when he was 10, until 2007, when he turned 17. He describes being stripped, doped, and exploited under the guise of punishment, which appeared to arouse the former Harvest Christian Fellowship pastor. He also described witnessing other children at the homes being SA'd by Havsgaard. Today, he battles severe PTSD, depression, and a loss of faith so deep he says, "I have lost faith in Jesus God and all religion." Friends, stop for a moment and let that sink in. These weren't criminals. They weren't rebels. They were children, hungry, desperate, and searching for love. Instead, they found predators disguised as pastors. It all began in 1998. Havsgaard first traveled to Romania with Samaritan's Purse, distributing shoeboxes of gifts. What looked like charity soon became something darker. According to the lawsuits, Havsgaard returned from that trip with an idea. Why not set up permanent homes in Romania under Harvest Christian Fellowship? Rescue homeless children, feed them, teach them, give them a shot at life. But the plaintiffs say the reality was the opposite, a trafficking pipeline disguised as charity. Greg Laurie approved the plan. From the outside, it was the perfect story. An American megachurch rescuing orphans in post-communist Romania. But behind the walls of these harvest homes, survivors allege a sadistic system of grooming, sensual torture, and lies. Instead of hope, children found horror. Now, here's where things get even more uncomfortable. The lawsuits allege Greg Laurie personally knew Paul Havsgaard for decades. He had served as assistant pastor at Harvest Riverside before leaving for Calvary Chapel of the High Desert. Their relationship, according to the filings, paved the way for Laurie to entrust Havsgaard with Romania's most vulnerable children. By 2004, whispers had become roars. Other American missionaries in Romania couldn't ignore what they were hearing. They urged Harvest to investigate. So Harvest's own missions. Pastor Richard Schutte joined an inspection team on the ground. The inspectors did not mince words. They told him straight, Paul Havsgaard is a pedophile. He needs to be on that plane with you tomorrow. He is an embarrassment to every single missionary and Christian worker. That should have been the end of the story. That should have been the moment the children were rescued. But according to the complaints, Harvest leadership back in California refused. Why? Because Havsgaard was too important to Harvest's fundraising. He was the face of the mission, the man who could bring in donors. So rather than remove him, they trimmed subsidies and looked the other way. And for 4 more years, the ABUSE continued. The lawsuits claim that the decision sealed the fate of dozens more children, left in what survivors called a torture chamber inside a prison. If this is true, the question is unavoidable. Why didn't Laurie and his team act sooner? Was it incompetence, negligence, or deliberate protection of their image at the expense of children's lives? Finally, in 2008, Havsgaard returned to California. But here's the shocking part. Not in disgrace. The complaints allege Harvest paid him around $200,000 in severance. The homes, closed. The children, thrown back onto the streets. No counseling, no support, no safety net. And then comes perhaps the most disturbing twist of all. In 2009, despite knowing what was said about him, Pastor Greg Laurie himself publicly praised Havsgaard as a pastor who faithfully served the Lord for many years at Harvest Christian Fellowship. He even compared him to Moses, claiming his life showed the power of one godly person. For survivors, imagine what that felt like. Imagine enduring years of ABUSE, finally seeing him gone, only to hear him being exalted from a pulpit. This isn't just negligence. Plaintiffs allege it's a betrayal at the deepest spiritual level. And here's where the story collides with Greg Laurie's rise to fame. During the same years this alleged SA was happening in Romania, Harvest was exploding in influence. Massive annual stadium crusades, a top 100 U.S. podcast, membership in the Southern Baptist Convention. Then came the Hollywood hit Jesus Revolution in 2023, grossing over $53 million, a film about Greg Laurie's youthful days as a preacher. Meanwhile, Harvest was sitting on more than 100 acres in Riverside and pulling in an estimated $52 million a year. Laurie himself lives in a home valued at over $5 million. While the brand soared, the children of Romania were left in ruins. Survivors say they weren't just forgotten, they were sacrificed on the altar of reputation and revenue. Now, decades later, the lawsuits have cracked open the past. Survivors are demanding accountability not just from Havsgaard, but from Harvest Christian Fellowship and Pastor Greg Laurie himself. Their claims? Negligence, cover-up, conspiracy, and yes, trafficking violations. The plaintiff's lawyer, Dr. Ann Oliverius, put it bluntly. How Laurie did nothing to protect them, even after Harvest received powerful evidence of SA, is hard to understand. So is his decision to let them suffer ever since. And this may only be the beginning. More than 20 additional survivors are preparing to file their own lawsuits. This is a storm that could rock the foundations of one of America's most visible megachurches. The legal team is now calling for information from anyone with knowledge of Havsgaard's misconduct before 1998 or after 2008, the operation of Harvest's Romanian homes, the decision-making inside Harvest leadership, This isn't just about the past. It's about whether a powerful church and its leader will finally face accountability for what survivors say was a 20-year cover-up. Harvest has responded, calling the allegations serious and disturbing, but also branding the lawsuits a form of financial extortion. They deny any cover-up and say they reported the allegations to law enforcement when contacted by the victims' representatives. They insist they will vigorously defend themselves in court. But survivors and their lawyers tell a different story, that this was a system of silence, designed to protect reputations and keep donors happy, while children were sacrificed in the shadows. And friends, that's the real tragedy, when image becomes more important than innocence. So here's the question. If these allegations are proven true, what does it mean for Greg Laurie, for Harvest, and for the evangelical world that lifted him up? And maybe the bigger question, how many more hidden stories like this are waiting to come to light in churches we trust? I want to hear from you. Should pastors who knowingly ignore ABUSE be held just as accountable as the ABUSERS themselves? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is a conversation the church can't afford to stay silent on. And if you want me to keep tracking this lawsuit as more survivors step forward, make sure you hit subscribe, tap the bell, and join me here as we shine a light in the darkest corners of the church. Because justice delayed is not justice denied. And the truth? The truth always finds its way out.